Hello folks, I'm Cooper, and today on Cooking with Cleavers, we're talking about bone cleavers, so heavyweight or heavier weight cleavers designed to bash through bones, whether that's lightweight bones like chickens or moving up towards pig bones and cow bones and the like. There is a ton of different variety in bone cleavers. You can have lightweight bone cleavers or heavier weight bone cleavers. There's also dual purpose cleavers, which are supposedly cleavers that can be used for slicing, similar to a slicing cleaver, but also some light bone cleaver work through like chicken bones. So we'll just work up through the different types of bone cleavers and talk about them, basic type things that determine if it is what category of bone cleaver, whether that's dual purpose, light cleaver, or heavier cleaver. Before we get into that though, full disclaimer, I don't really use any of my bone cleavers very often. Most of the cooking I do is with boneless meats, and I think most people who really do cooking mostly with boneless meats. If I'm going to make a dish that has bones in it, like various Taiwanese dishes here use chicken meat with the bone in, I generally don't have to cut that up, because if I get that type of meat, I usually get it from an open air market, and the butcher there will typically cut it up to the size I want before he packages it up to give it to me. So there's that as a disclaimer, but I do have 3 different types of bone cleavers that generally fit into a few different categories. There's a lot of different types of bone cleavers and different shapes of bone cleavers that you can talk about. But today we're talking about the ones I have, and honestly these ones will cover most people who are not professional cooks who have to use a bone cleaver multiple times a day, every day. But this here is a 1 udao, and that's decided primarily on the thickness of the spine and how that tapers towards the blade. A 1 udao is described as a dual purpose blade, and typically will have a spine thickness of more than 2 millimeters, but no more than 3 millimeters. So somewhere in that range, and it'll maintain that thickness most of the way along the blade. An important thing to note here is that for these blades, what describes it as a dual purpose blade or a lightweight cleaver and a heavyweight cleaver is not necessarily the weight, because this is actually the heaviest cleaver I own, and that's because it has the largest blade. But that weight is important in cleaving, but the thickness of the spine and how that thickness is maintained through the blade is more significant, because the edge is supported by the thickness of the blade, and not just the weight. And you need to prioritize the thickness of the blade and the support of the edge to talk about chopping cleavers, bone cleavers, as you move up to more heavyweight meats. So for this 1 udao, this dual purpose cleaver I have, the spine of it is 2.9 or 3 millimeters thick, depending on where on the spine you check, and it maintains that thickness most of the way through the blade as it goes towards the edge. With a 3 millimeter thick spine on this dual purpose cleaver, I would not use this for anything past chicken bones, pretty much. I'd use this extensively through any bone in a chicken. It'll chop through it very easily, but I wouldn't go up to more difficult bones like porks and beefs. I wouldn't use it on those sorts of bones because without the extra thickness in the blade, the edge is not supportive enough to go through those harder bones. And if you try to chop through harder bones, it has the weight potentially to get through it, but the edge will not be supported enough and could have damage, bend out of shape very quickly at the edge. and that's not ideal. So when you're talking about cleavers, it's a little bit confusing when it's talking about light cleavers versus heavy cleavers, because it's not so important the weight necessarily, but the thickness. Typically, as it gets thicker, it will get heavier, but when you compare a blade like this to a blade this size, there's the weight difference between these two is actually fairly comparable, but due to this blade having a larger area, it's about the same weight, even though it's a lot thinner. So for dual purpose cleavers, I would describe them as a lightweight to a very lightweight cleaver in all senses. I never use this actually in its dual purpose form for a slicing cleaver because it's too heavy to slice through things, too thick around the edge. I'd much rather use an actual slicing cleaver to do that, where this will glide through things. If you want to use this as a slicing cleaver, you have to push it through things. It has the weight to cut through it, but because it's thicker, it acts like a wedge if you're trying to cut through any vegetable, pretty much, even large amounts of meats. That's not really what this is designed for. This is designed to chop through things. That could be hard veggies to meats with bones in it, like chicken meats, but this is a chopping knife and should be gripped as such to chop rather than to slice, and used to chop rather than slice. Moving up a tier, we get to a lightweight cleaver. This is again where the size affects weight too. So this is a lightweight cleaver, which I would use on chicken bones and thinner pork or beef bones, but not anything thick. It has a 3.5 millimeter spine, and it maintains that thickness most of the way up to the edge. This blade is actually only about 457 grams, but a slicing knife from the same company that's a similar size, a little bit more, is like 300 grams. So the extra thickness in the blade adds that extra 150 grams or so, and makes this a light cleaver. Honestly, most people would be best served with a light cleaver like this, because I don't know too many people who butcher like whole pigs and cows. Most people probably buy the beef and pork boneless, or already cut into, if it has bones in it, already cut into whatever they want to cook, the size that they want to cook. And you might get like whole chickens or something and need to butcher that up, and this would be a good option for that. This is a light cleaver, again, because of that spine thickness at 3.5 millimeters. Basically from 3 millimeters up to like 4 millimeters would be like a light cleaver, and then 4 millimeters and above would be like a heavy cleaver, like this cleaver here. This is a 4.5 millimeter along the spine cleaver, and this blade weighs in somewhere over 600 grams. So you can, the blade is a little bit bigger in area, but the most significant weight gain here is the extra millimeter of thickness, and it maintains that all along the blade. When you're getting into heavier weight cleavers, there's all sorts of different types. You can get like CCK's Kung Pao cleavers, and they have extra thickness and weight up on the front of the blade, and that's just to give you more chopping power as you're chopping through bones and the like. For most people, you really don't need a heavyweight cleaver, but if you want to get one, it works perfectly fine for chicken and stuff too. You'll get a little more tired if you're using it for extended periods of time, but most people are just cooking in their own houses, so you probably don't need to worry about getting too tired, because you're not going to be chopping through 1,000 chickens a day or something. But when you're talking about cost of a heavy cleaver, bone cleaver, or a lightweight bone cleaver, whatever, you can get pretty cheap ones and they'll be just fine. Whereas with a slicing cleaver, having a higher quality steel will make it slice better due to it sharpens up easier and will retain an edge longer. For a bone cleaver, you can pretty much get the cheapest thing that has a good thickness to the blade as you can and use that. And it'll be perfectly fine for most people because again, most people don't use bone cleavers that often in their cooking, so the couple of times you do pull it out doesn't really matter. You don't need a bone cleaver to be razor sharp. In fact, you don't want it to be razor sharp because the sharper the edge is, the less that edge will be retained as you're bashing through bones and other hard things. So if you want to buy a bone cleaver, I recommend you get the cheapest thing possible that has a good thickness along the spine to give it a good amount of weight. It doesn't matter so much about the steel type. Just remember, you don't want to spend a lot of money on these. Getting a harder steel is actually a negative in a bone cleaver, because if you have too hard a steel and you're bashing against bones, that can make your knife more prone to cracking and chipping in the steel, and you don't want that. Typically you want a little bit softer steel in your bone cleaver than you would in a slicing cleaver, just so that the softer a steel is, typically the more durable it is, so the less prone it is to cracking and chipping as you're bashing into things. So get basically whatever you can find for inexpensive that's comfortable for you, and that'll be perfectly fine for your needs. I don't recommend much knives marked as dual purpose cleavers. They're not that useful. You should not use them for a slicing cleaver. They're terrible at it, and they're really only good for like chicken bones, lighter chicken bones, if you're going to get a dual purpose cleaver. If you get something that's marketed to do two things, it'll do neither of them particularly well. If I had to recommend you to get two different cleavers and you wanted something that could do bones and something that you could do cleaving, I'd get a nice quality slicing cleaver like this CCK, and a nice heavyweight bone cleaver that is not too expensive, and go with that. Spend more money on your slicing cleaver. You'll be using it more than your bone cleaver, and your bone cleaver doesn't need to be sharpened that well. It doesn't have to be made out of any great steel. It just has to be thick and heavy and comfortable to use as you're smashing into meats and bones, and that'll be perfectly fine for you. Thank you for watching Cooking with Cleavers. If you have any questions or anything you'd like to learn about, please put that down in the comments section. I'll try to respond to that and make videos as you request them, like this video was made. If you would like to learn more about cleavers, slicing cleavers, chopping cleavers, bone cleavers, whatever, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. I'll put more content up as quick as I can make it. And if you like this video, please hit the like button and feel free to share with friends and family. Thank you very much.